Hi, it's Agnes. Welcome to 4G.
Hi everyone. Today, let's talk about the brachial plexus. To fully understand the brachial plexus, it's important to go back to where it begins. So I'm drawing here the spinal cord. So the spinal cord will split into the anterior and posterior rami. I'm showing here the vertebrae where the spinal nerves will pass through. So we have C5, C6, C7, C8, and T1. So that's where our roots are found. There you go. So just to remember, our brachial plexus is a combination of the anterior rami, okay? Not the posterior rami. Let me draw here the SCM or the sternocleidomastoid, and we have the clavicle. Now, these are important because they are the borders of the triangles of the neck. We have the anterior and the posterior triangle. So the posterior triangle is the location of the brachial plexus. That is where the brachial plexus is found. It's just that in our illustration right now, I will go beyond the posterior triangle of the neck so that it can easily be illustrated and understood. Okay, so let's say the C5, C6, C7, C8, and T1 roots. So just imagine that came from the spinal cord. But to illustrate it more easily, I separated it or zoomed it out from the posterior triangle of the neck. So we have here the C5 and C6, and as you can see, they will combine. C7 will have a solo trip on its own, and C8 and T1 will combine. This combination is what you call the trunks. So the combination of the C5 and the C6 will be known as the upper trunk. And C7 is the middle trunk. And the combination of the C8 and the T1 is the lower trunk. Now, these trunks will eventually divide. So the upper trunk will divide into anterior and posterior. The middle trunk will divide into anterior and posterior. And the lower trunk will divide into anterior and posterior. Now, the divisions, we call this a division. So we have, again, literally by the name itself, if it's anterior, the division goes to the anterior part of the arm. If it's posterior, it goes to the posterior part of the arm. So that their location is actually in the literal location of the arm already. Now, for the anterior division of the upper trunk and the middle trunk, they will combine together. Again, anterior division of the upper and the middle trunk will combine together. And all the posterior divisions of the upper, middle, and lower will combine and become one. And the anterior division of the lower trunk will go on a solo trip. So we will now call this the chords. So the combination of the anterior division of the upper and the middle is what we call the lateral chord. Now, lateral because it is found in the lateral area of the arm. And then the posterior chord is found in the posterior aspect of the arm. And then the medial goes to the medial part of the arm. Now, the lateral chord will extend until our forearm, arm, and hand, and they will branch out so that it can supply other more muscles, and these muscles will be supplied by the nerves, and we will call them the branches. Now, because they are branching through, so there are already branches from the more superior part, from the C5. So from the C5 upper trunk, from the C5, C6, and C7, there is already a branch that comes out of it, which is very important for the brachial plexus, and we will call this the long thoracic nerve. So it will supply a very important muscle. That's why we included it. And then from the upper trunk, there will be another branch, the dorsal scapular nerve, which will supply a muscle in the scapular area. And then there will be a small muscle supplied, which is the nerve of subclavius. So obviously it supplies the subclavius muscle. And then we have the suprascapular nerve. By the name itself, it supplies a muscle in the scapular area. And then on the lateral cord, there will be a branch. That is the lateral pectoral nerve that will supply the pectoral portion, a muscle. And then we have the musculocutaneous nerve, which is already found on the upper arm and will supply very important muscles. And then we have the median nerve, which is, this is more distal already. It supplies more of the arm and also the ulnar nerve. And then from the medial cord, we have the medial pectoral nerve, still pectoral area, more proximal part of the body. And then we have the medial cutaneous nerve of arm, which supplies the sensory portion of the medial arm. And then we have the medial cutaneous nerve of the forearm, which supplies the sensory portion of the medial forearm. And in the posterior cord, there will be also branches. So we have the upper subscapular nerve. So by the name itself, it supplies the scapular muscle area in the subscapular area. And then we have the thoracodorsal nerve, which is a very important nerve because it supplies a very big muscle. And then we have the lower subscapular nerve. And then more on the distal area, we have the axillary nerve. So this is found more on the axillary portion, literally where it is located also. And then we have the radial nerve, which is the biggest nerve of the brachial plexus because it is a combination of all the posterior division of our upper, middle, and lower trunks. So that is the branches of our brachial plexus. For the muscles that are innervated of these nerves, it will be given on the next video.
Thank you for listening. Bye!